Welcome to Microsoft Mechanics. Coming up on the show, we take a look at the latest advances in how you can directly apply Microsoft security intelligence to protect your organization with Azure AD Identity Protection for continuous real-time assessment of logins and users to prevent against threats at the point of authentication, and how you can reduce your attack surface by managing and restricting the exposure of privileged identities with privileged identity management. So I'm joined by Alex Weiner, Group Program Manager on the Azure AD Identity team. Welcome to the studio.
Great to be here.
So we've had Azure Active Directory for a while now, and it's a fundamental technology that manages user identity for access to corporate resources and is central to our user authentication across Microsoft services. How has Azure AD evolved to help protect users?
I think there's three major innovations that we've done to help protect users in the last little bit. One is conditional access, which allows us to really frame how resources are accessed under the conditions that they come in. So things like if you come in from off corporate network, you can challenge with multi-factor auth, that sort of thing. Identity protection, which really uses the intelligent security graph to look at all the kinds of signals we have from across the industry and across Microsoft's researchers to look at threats in the environment and then to interrupt those threats before they can get into your environment. And then finally, privileged identity management, which ensures that if there is any kind of an account takeover, there's a much lower chance that that's an admin that's being taken over.
Very good. So we've already seen a lot of conditional access on the show in the past. Can you show us some of this identity protection?
Sure, I'd be happy to walk you through some identity protection. So to start off, I'll just point out that to get to identity protection, you would just go to the marketplace. And within the marketplace, if you search the word identity or protection or kind of any part of it, that would come right up. And there's Azure AD Identity Protection. And so it's just select that, and that'll enable it in your tenant. Once you've done that, then you would see Azure AD Identity Protection. And as we get into it, we see that there's sort of three major areas we're dealing with. The first is around users who are at risk in the environment. And it looks, things like where we believe the credentials for that user have been leaked into the internet or in other ways need to be addressed. Second is risk events, which is where we would look at things like sessions that are anomalous, that maybe are coming in from an environment we don't like. We can use the DCU's data to tell us that it's coming in from a botnet. We can look at Tor signal. We have a very good track of which machines are Tor involved. And all those things allow us to give a very good picture of what's a risky session. And then finally is configuration vulnerabilities in the environment, places where you can improve your security posture by addressing configuration issues.
And just to pause for a second, this is a big change from when we had to wade through lots and lots of reports to get to this kind of information.
Yeah, that's right. What we're trying to do now is give you, for the identity security professional, make sure they have a sort of a one-stop shop where they can go in and manage all that from one place and really understand what's going on in their environment. You can see here in the environment that we have, for example, users flagged for risk. And as we drill into that, we can see that we have, some number of users here that have risk scores. That just indicates that there's a possibility that their credentials have been compromised, right? And if we drilled into any one of these, we can see that in some cases we have users with a high risk level. We really want to be extra concerned about that. And so, for example, picking on Mike Lee here, we can drill in and see that Mike, among other things, has had a leaked credential. And so,
how do we know that his credentials have actually been leaked?
We have a couple of different sources to look at. One very common source for us is that we run a consumer identity system in Microsoft account, and as well as running the enterprise identity system in Azure Active Directory. And between the two, we see over 14 billion logins a day. We score all of those logins and we're looking at attack patterns. And there are certain attack patterns that show up where we can tell that, for example, a given IP address has gone bad and is only being used by an attacker. And so in those kinds of cases, we can say that any traffic that comes in from that IP is bad traffic. We also work with the industry, with security researchers, with our own researchers inside, with law enforcement when appropriate, to get signals that, for example, every time you see in the news, X million, X 100 million accounts were leaked by some company. Sort of those various third-party IDPs that have maybe not as good a security posture or have had, a leak those are places where we can source that data and then make sure that if your employee has reused their username and password at another site and that site is breached, that we can protect you from that eventuality.
Excellent. That seems like we've got a lot of protection built in there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here that is driven by that, plus machine learning systems and a lot of really cool stuff. In this case, users with leaked credentials here, this is a pretty strong signal. This is, we're basically, this means we've seen the credential in the wild. We know that username and password has been compromised. And to get that user back to a posture of safety, we want to get that password changed. So if we wanted to, in Mike's case, we could see that with that leaked credential, we could ask to reset the password right here, in Flow, and just do a manual password reset.
That seems like having to manually reset, though, for lots of users in your organization could be a problem.
Right, it's a problem from two perspectives. One is if you have a large organization, that's a lot of manual work to do. The more significant problem is that the time between when the compromise is detected and the time you can remediate it is the time that the bad guy gets to play. And we really want to minimize that window of time, right?
Yeah.
And the only real way to do that is to set up a policy and let the system act on your behalf, so that the second we see a problem, we can react to that problem with policy, and the machine auto-remediates the account. And so in this case, you could set up a policy. So we see the user risk policy for automatic mitigation. And if we drill in here, we have a variety of things we can do. But one thing we can do is we can just say, look, if we have an account that we know is compromised, let's go ahead and block access. We could choose, if we wanted to have them change their password. That's another thing we can ask to do.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of things that we can do here.
So how does user risk differ from different risks events that we saw earlier inside of the console?
Well, user risk, again, is kind of that indication that you have a problem that indicates that a user's password has actually gotten in the hands of bad guys. Right? One way that we see that evolving is that, for example, if a user has logins that are coming from, say, a Tor network, I'm a big privacy advocate, and there's valid uses for Tor browsers, but the fact is that 94% of the traffic that comes in from Tor browsers is malicious. That's what both we and the industry have seen. And so we have to realize that is a strong signal. Some things botnet infected, we know that's a strong signal. One or two of those things, we might be making a mistake. Every algorithm has some amount of false positive. But a set of those together, and you start to say, okay, we're pretty sure this is a compromised account. This is no accident, right? So a series of those together creates a user risk. An individual event is a session risk. It means just that something with that session was wrong. A set of session risks obviously can roll up to a higher user risk, and everything kind of rolls together. We use a machine learning algorithm to calculate the probability that the user is compromised. So over time, we adapt that, and the systems auto-adapt to that.
Very good. So it actually really does start to learn around what's happening and what the behaviors really look like.
That's right. The system is a learning system, which is a cool part about it. So that as our bad actors evolve their tactics, the system automatically evolves itself. So in this particular case, we can go down and we see there's a sign-in risk policy we can set up. And the sign-in risk policy allows us to look at a few things. We can apply it to a certain set of users, so we might want to do a rollout in the environment. And then we can set it for different risk levels. And so if we drill into the conditions here, we see that we have it set for a sign-in risk of medium and above. And then in this case, we have different controls we can apply. We can say we just want to do a multi-factor auth challenge in this case, or for this experiment, we'll say, let's just block access outright. So if we have somebody coming in from, say, a Tor network, let's not let them log in at all. And that's obviously going to be informed by your company's policy and what's appropriate in your environment. The last thing that we give you is the ability to actually estimate what's happening in terms of what's the impact. How many challenges can you expect? What's the help desk impact? That sort of thing. So we have that policy is turned on, and it's all ready to go.
Cool. So I actually just happen to have Tor browser installed on this machine just here.
Oh, perfect.
And I already have Edge open as well. So, and I've typed in my username and my password. So if I just hit sign in, this is what should happen with a regular sign on, which is doing the right thing, I guess. So I hit sign in, and that's taken me into Office, in fact, in this case. So I'm just going to change over into Tor browser. And from within Tor, you can see that it really is inside of Tor. And type in exactly the same thing again. And in this case, we can see that the sign-in was blocked. So that's the policy applying successfully.
Right, and that's exactly what we just turned on just a few seconds ago. And the cool thing about this is that your good user, right, under good circumstances, is experiencing no friction. There's no MFA challenge, there's nothing in their way. But as soon as there's a risk factor present, we're able to shut down that risk.
So here, identity protection is actually securing the logins as the authentications happen. Are we doing anything that's going to harness the signals from other services and devices?
Yeah, absolutely. We go back to the risk events section. We can see that there are multiple different types of risks that we detect. Many of those are, as we talked about, sourced from outside, from our own researchers. We talked about the Tor network stuff. Another interesting signal is sign-ins from infected devices. And what that's looking at is botnet infections. Microsoft's Digital Crimes Unit does a lot of work to track and take down botnets. And as part of that work, they have to identify nodes that are botnet infected. And they share that information with us as they collect it. And this is actually a very powerful way for you to know that a login's coming from an infected device. And so here, as we drill in on sign-ins from infected devices, we can see that various folks have been infected, and we can see zero access and dorkbot. And if we see our old friend Mike Lee, again, he's showing up with configure infection. So we can investigate that a bit and see what else we can learn about Mike. And we see that he's had, again, quite a few events here. That's why his user risk is higher. One of the things that we can also look at is kind of what's his role in the organization. And right here, we see something that should, make us pause, right? He's a global administrator.
Yeah, and global admin inside of Azure AD essentially means you've got the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, that's right. And, that's a serious concern. This is a place where, maybe what we really wish is that we didn't have global administrators that didn't need to be global administrators. If some number of people are going to have an account takeover or an infection in the environment, you'd like the number of people in your environment who are global admins as well to be as small as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we talked about the users flagged for risk and risk events, and then we have the vulnerabilities. One of the places where we see a vulnerability is that privileged identity management is telling us is that we have too many global administrators.
And how does it know that we have too many global admins? Is it just like if you've got more than 4?
Well, no, it's a little more clever than that. It's looking at the size of your organization, the segment of the industry you're in, and kind of what's normal in that industry. So we're using a lot of intelligence around what we know around how tenants behave and what's the right number for somebody of your size. So it's not quite as simple as 5 is bad, although fewer is kind of always better. Let's go and look actually at privileged identity management in its where we can see kind of all of its glory. Privileged identity management lets me do several different things. One of the most important things that it allows is what we call just-in-time access. The idea here is that I don't need to be an admin all the time, right? I probably need to be an admin for some very small amount of my work. When I go to get that admin privilege, I might want to have something like additional auditing to say when I did it, or to talk about who the approver is for that role, or just doing something simple like multi-factor auth. And so the idea here is that if the bad guy does get my credentials, the likelihood that I'm an admin in that moment is extremely small, right? That's really what we're after. So privileged identity management here is going to give me kind of a one-stop shop of a view of what is the state of my admin rights in the organization. I have admins who aren't using their privileged roles. I have too many global admins. And what I can do in any one of those cases is I can take an admin who maybe is in a permanent role, and I can actually say, let's go ahead and change this to make them a temporary administrator instead of a full-time administrator. So here's global admin, and I can look at, and I can actually change that, and I can say, okay, let's make this permanent, make it temporary, and actually set up the rules under which admin access is granted in the environment.
So we actually have technology built into Azure AD that helps to intelligently analyze and surface these kind of threats, and even helps IT admins to be able to remediate these things, and tells them if they've got too many global admins inside of their environments. Whereabouts are you going next?
Well, we're continuously adding signals for detection and prevention. And part of this is bringing in signals from things like advanced threat analytics and cloud app security. We're also extending the reach of our enforcement mechanisms to better embrace on-prem and hybrid scenarios. And then finally, we're extending conditional access capabilities to embrace more scenarios so that it can react and give you a richer canvas to work with.
These are really exciting times for identity. Whereabouts can these folks go to learn more?
Well, if you're managing your directory services on premises, I'd encourage you to look at Windows Server 2016, which also brings just-in-time and just-enough access principles to on-prem AD. If you don't already have Azure Active Directory set up in your environment, you can sign up for an Azure Active Directory premium trial, which I'd recommend you do so you can try these features out that we've shown you. You can go to portal.azure.com and sign up for a preview of Azure Active Directory, identity protection, and privileged identity management. And you can learn more at the link below.
Alex, this is great stuff. Thank you very much for joining us on Microsoft Mechanics. And thank you very much for watching Microsoft Mechanics. For the latest in tech updates, we'll see you later.